The cold vastness of space stretched endlessly, a silent abyss pierced only by the distant glimmers of dying stars. Against this infinite canvas, the warship Ardent Vengeance sliced through the darkness, its hull battered but unyielding. Inside its command deck, Commander Henry stood motionless, eyes fixed on the holographic star map, swirling with the chaotic signatures of a brewing conflict. Henry was a man forged in the crucible of war, lean and weathered, with sharp green eyes that bore the weight of countless battles. His jaw was set, lips pressed tight against the fatigue gnawing at his bones. Yet, beneath that hardened exterior, a storm of thoughts churned, questions that no strategy or order could quell. The war was not just a fight for territory, it was a struggle for survival against an enemy unlike any humanity had faced before. "Commander!" The communications officer's voice cut through the tense silence. "The frontline fleet reports heavy losses. The Seraphim Legion is advancing faster than expected." Henry's fingers tightened into a fist. The Seraphim Legion, a ruthless coalition of rogue factions and alien mercenaries, had ignited a spiral of devastation across the outer colonies. Their objective was clear: crush human resistance and claim the resource-rich systems for themselves. "We can't let them breach the Epsilon sector," Henry said. Voice steady despite the urgency. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. Every ship, every soldier, we hold the line." As the Ardent Vengeance surged forward, its engines roaring with renewed purpose, Henry's gaze shifted to the viewports. Beyond the cold glass, the void held secrets, shattered worlds, lost hopes, and the faint whispers of a future hanging by a thread. He knew the battle ahead would demand more than tactics and firepower. It would require sacrifice, courage, and perhaps a price he was not yet ready to pay. The first salvo lit up the dark. The war had begun. The warship Ardent Vengeance shuddered violently as the first blasts from the Seraphim Legion struck its shields. Red warning lights flashed across the command deck, bathing Henry's stern face in an ominous glow. The relentless barrage was a grim reminder. This battle was no mere skirmish. It was a crucible meant to break them. "Damage report," Henry barked, his voice slicing through the tense hum of alarms. "Shields at 40%. Hull integrity." "Dropping fast in sections 4 and 6, the tactical officer replied, fingers dancing over the console. Henry's jaw tightened. Every second counted. The enemy ships were sleek, deadly, piloted by mercenaries who had nothing left to lose. Amid the chaos, Henry's mind flashed back to the quiet moments before the war, to a time when hope was still a fragile ember. His family, lost in an earlier conflict, haunted the edges of his memory. Their faces pushed him forward, a tether to humanity amid the void. "Commander, multiple contacts approaching fast," the radar operator warned. "They're deploying drone swarms, swarms capable of disabling our systems." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Deploy countermeasures. Electronic warfare unit, scramble to neutralize those drones." The ship's AI, Arden, responded instantly, unleashing a pulse that shimmered like a ghost through the void. Waves of electromagnetic energy rippled outward, clashing against the enemy's mechanical insects. As the battle raged, Henry's tactical team coordinated strikes and defenses with surgical precision. But the enemy adapted quickly. Each victory was met with renewed ferocity. In the midst of the storm, Henry caught sight of a shadow flickering across the tactical display, a small vessel breaking formation, heading straight for the Ardent Vengeance's vulnerable rear. "Alert! Hostile! Boarding pod inbound!" the security chief shouted. Henry grabbed his sidearm and rushed toward the docking bay, the corridors echoing with the sounds of battle and hurried footsteps. The boarding team was ruthless, cybernetically enhanced fighters intent on sabotage and destruction. Henry's squad met them head-on in the narrow hallways, the air thick with smoke and the harsh clang of combat. Amid the firefight, Henry found himself face to face with a mercenary leader, a cold-eyed warrior with a cruel smile. Their weapons crossed, eyes locked in a deadly dance. "This war isn't yours to win," Henry growled. The mercenary laughed. "Then you'll die trying." Explosions rocked the ship as the two clashed, each blow a testament to survival in the merciless void. As the skirmish reached its crescendo, Henry realized that the battle was more than physical. It was a war for souls, for what remained of humanity's honor in the stars. The corridors of the ardent vengeance echoed with the heavy thud of boots and the sharp reports of pulse rifles. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of scorched metal. Henry moved swiftly, his body taut like a drawn wire, every sense alert. The boarding pod had been neutralized, but the cost was steep. Several key systems were offline, and worse. The enemy's attack had shattered the fragile cohesion among the fleet's commanders. In the makeshift command center, Henry faced his closest allies, men whose loyalty was tested by desperation and doubt. Captain Reese, commander of the Heavy. Cruiser Titan's wrath slammed a fist on the table. "We can't hold the Epsilon sector much longer. We're stretched too thin. We need reinforcements or a retreat." Opposing him was Admiral Vance, whose cold gaze was sharper than any blade. "Retreat is surrender. We either fight here or lose everything. The Council expects results, not excuses." Henry's voice cut through the rising tension. "This isn't just a line on a map, it's the lifeline for millions. If Epsilon falls, the outer colonies will crumble." The room fell silent, the weight of command pressing down on every man. Outside, the ardent vengeance limped through a fractured front line. The once mighty fleet was a shadow of itself. Ships lost, crews broken, hope fading. Henry knew that. Victory was no longer guaranteed by firepower alone. Trust was the battlefield now. Later, in the dim light of his quarters, Henry removed his helmet. His hair was damp with sweat, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. The war was eroding something. Deeper than flesh and steel, it was corroding their very spirit. A soft chime announced a message. It was from an unexpected source, Leah, a pilot from a distant outpost known for her unorthodox tactics and unwavering resolve. "Commander," her voice was steady but urgent, "we've intercepted communications hinting at a traitor within our ranks. Someone feeding intel to the Seraphim Legion." Henry's heart sank. A betrayal now would shatter what little unity remained. He knew what he had to do. To survive, the cracks in their armor had to be sealed, even if it meant confronting his own comrades. As the ship veered toward the next battlefront, Henry steeled himself. War was no longer about glory or honor. It was a relentless test of will, and he was determined to endure. The ardent vengeance drifted through the vast emptiness of space, its hull scarred and battered from countless clashes. Within the cold steel corridors, a quiet tension hung heavier than the aftershocks of any explosion. Here, the enemy was not only outside but inside, lurking in the silence between words, in the flicker of a glance. Commander Henry sat before the flickering holomap in the war room, the blue light casting harsh shadows across his tired face. Every data stream, every encrypted message was under scrutiny. The traitor's subtle fingerprints were hidden well, masked by layers of code and deception. "Sir," Lieutenant Merrick reported, fingers flying over the console, "we've traced a suspicious data leak originating from the communications hub. Someone's been sending false coordinates to our fleet, rerouting units into traps." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Seal off the comms room. No one in or out without my approval." Outside the transparent bulkhead, the stars seemed indifferent, distant and cold. The war was no longer just fought with lasers and missiles. It was a battle of shadows, secrets, and whispered lies. As Henry assembled a small team of trusted officers to root out the mole, suspicion poisoned the crew. Accusations sparked like wildfire, friendship strained, and loyalty frayed. The ship that once moved as one now creaked with distrust. In the dimly lit corridors, Henry confronted the crew, searching faces for any sign of guilt or fear. Each denial felt heavier than the last. The weight of suspicion was suffocating. Meanwhile, in the ship's underbelly, a figure cloaked in darkness moved with silent purpose. The traitor's identity remained hidden, but their plans were perilously close to fruition. One night, as Henry reviewed security logs, an alert flashed: an unauthorized attempt to access the ship's weapon systems. The intrusion had been swift, but deliberate. Henry's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm. This was no longer a game of shadows. It was a race against time. Gathering his loyal officers, Henry prepared a trap. They broadcast a false command, bait to lure the saboteur into the open. In the sterile corridors, footsteps echoed softly as the traitor took the bait. Henry's team closed in. The ambush was swift and brutal. The traitor fought with deadly precision, revealing cybernetic enhancements that explained their ability to evade detection. Cornered and desperate, the saboteur sneered. "You think you're the only ones fighting for survival. This war isn't about you. It's about who controls the future." Henry stepped forward, voice calm but unyielding. "Not while I'm alive." With a final struggle, the traitor was subdued, their motives unraveled. A bitter vendetta rooted in lost family and broken promises. As dawn approached, the ardent vengeance steadied its course. The immediate threat was over, but Henry knew the war inside would linger longer than any battle in space. He looked out at the endless stars, a silent vow forming on his lips. No matter the enemy, seen or unseen, he would fight to the last breath. The ardent vengeance drifted perilously close to the Epsilon sector's contested boundary, its engines straining against the gravitational pull of a dying star. Outside, the remnants of shattered ships floated like ghostly wreckage, a grim testament to the fierce battles that had ravaged the system. Inside, tension cracked like static electricity, thickening the stale air of the command deck. Commander Henry stood motionless, staring at the chaotic star map that flickered with fading icons, symbols of lost allies, silent screams lost in the void. The war had become a grindstone, wearing down even the strongest wills. Supplies were dwindling. The crew's endurance was stretched thin. Every decision carried the weight of potential annihilation. "Commander," Captain Reese's voice broke through the quiet, heavy with exhaustion. "We can't hold this position much longer. The Seraphim Legion's numbers grow every day. We need to decide. Fall back to regroup or make a final stand here." Henry's gaze hardened. "Retreat means losing everything we fought for, but standing our ground without hope is suicide." A tense silence filled the room. Henry's thoughts raced back to those he had lost, family, friends, comrades who had vanished into the endless black. Their faces haunted him, their sacrifices a grim reminder that failure was not an option. "Prepare for the final assault," Henry ordered, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We make our last stand at the edge of collapse." Outside, the warship's shields flickered under relentless bombardment as the Seraphim Legion unleashed their most devastating attack yet. Swarms of drones zipped through space like locusts, tearing through defense lines with mechanical precision. Inside, the ship Henry moved like a force of nature, coordinating defenses, rallying soldiers, and personally leading counterattacks. His voice was the anchor amid the chaos, steady and unwavering. In a desperate gambit, Henry led a boarding party onto the flagship of the Seraphim Legion. The corridors were a twisted maze of alien technology and human desperation. The enemy fought viciously, but Henry's resolve burned brighter. The clash was brutal, steel against claw, gunfire against raw ferocity. Blood and sweat mingled in the dim light as Henry faced down the Legion's commander, a towering figure clad in warped armor, eyes burning with hatred. "You fight for a lost cause," the commander hissed. Henry replied with a defiant roar, charging forward. "As long as I breathe, I fight for the future." The duel was fierce and unforgiving, but Henry's determination prevailed. The Legion's command shattered, sending shockwaves through their ranks. Back on the Ardent Vengeance, the tide of battle shifted. Inspired by Henry's courage, the fleet pressed their advantage, forcing the enemy into retreat. As silence fell, the cost was clear. The ship bore new scars, and the faces around Henry told stories of sacrifice and survival. But in the depths of his soul, Henry knew this was only the beginning. The edge of collapse had been reached, but the fight for tomorrow was far from over. The Ardent Vengeance was quiet, too quiet. Its decks, once alive with coordinated chaos, now echoed with a strange stillness. Fires had been extinguished, hull breaches sealed. The Seraphim Legion had been pushed back, for now. Yet Henry felt no peace, only the brittle edge of something more dangerous than a fleet of warships. Distrust. In the war room, the lights were dimmed to conserve power, and the air was thick with tension. Around the central holotable stood Henry, Captain Reese, Admiral Vance, and Leah, the rogue pilot turned tactician who had earned Henry's trust in fire and blood. They stood like statues, barely speaking. A holographic map hovered between them, flickering with red markers, friendly ships, supply lines, communications relays, and one blinking yellow symbol, an anomaly within their own ranks, a second traitor. "We purged the saboteur. I watched him die," Henry said grimly. "So why are command codes still being leaked?" Reese looked away. "Because someone else is feeding intel to the enemy." Henry scanned the room, and we don't know who. The last mission had splintered more than hull plating. It had cracked trust. Soldiers whispered in corridors, officers second-guessed every order, and the chain of command, the lifeline that kept the fleet together, was starting to fray. Henry sat alone in his quarters later that night, reviewing encrypted transmissions. His face, illuminated by the cold glow of the screen, was pale and drawn. For the first time, he looked older than his years, worn thin, bone-tired. A message blinked onto the display, unsigned, untraced. "The traitor isn't who you think. They sit closest to you." Henry leaned back slowly, mind racing. Who had access to the comm codes? Who knew the operation schedules? Who stood at his side during every critical moment? His blood ran cold. Meanwhile, Leah descended deep into the ship's restricted archives. She had grown suspicious, not of Henry, but of Admiral Vance. The Admiral had pushed for every high-risk move, every aggressive maneuver, and he always seemed to know just enough to stay ahead. She decrypted fragments of an old message buried deep in the logs. Her eyes widened. Coordinates, shipment manifests, orders from an unknown source. Was Vance a pawn or the master? Back. On the command deck, Henry made a decision that went against everything he believed. He locked down the ship. No one in, no one out. "You're placing us under martial law?" Vance barked. "No," Henry replied. "I'm placing us under survival." Aye. Storm began to brew. Officers took sides. Half the ship backed Henry's unwavering authority. The other half whispered about tyranny, about obsession, about losing their leader to paranoia. The Ardent Vengeance became a battlefield of silence. Loyalties fractured, faith twisted, and through it all, the Seraphim Legion watched from afar. Waiting for their enemy to implode, Henry stood on the bridge, watching the stars blur as they entered silent drift. He whispered, "If we don't find the leak, we're already dead." The Ardent Vengeance drifted in blackout mode, hidden within the magnetic shadows of a fractured asteroid field. The silence aboard was suffocating, not from fear, but from doubt. Power was rationed, communications were locked, trust once. The ship's strongest shield had collapsed into shattered fragments. Commander Henry sat alone in the observation chamber, the stars reflected in his tired green eyes like forgotten promises. He barely noticed the tremble in his fingers, or the silence in his heartbeat. The betrayal wasn't just data leaks or sabotaged relays. It was personal, intimate. It was someone he knew. Down in the encrypted archives, Leah worked tirelessly with her AI assistant, Cora. The logs she had uncovered in the previous mission were riddled with misdirection, coded in dead languages, and layered with neural firewalls. But now the pieces were aligning. The trail of data led not to a distant hacker or infiltrated mercenary. It led upward. Leah burst into Henry's quarters unannounced. Her face was pale, her breath quick. "It's not a soldier, not a junior officer. It's Vance, Admiral Vance." Henry didn't speak. His face froze. She handed him the datapad. "For months, he's been rerouting resources, leaking ship deployments, even sending coded directives to Seraphim scouts. He's their inside hand, and he's been waiting for the fleet to implode from the inside." Henry's world tilted slightly. Vance, the man who had sat at his table, shared war stories, bled beside him during the fall of Orion 6, the man who had spoken of unity, of sacrifice, the man who had once saved his life. "I need proof." "Undeniable proof," Henry whispered, voice dry as dust. They didn't have to wait long. That night, Vance made his move. A high-priority emergency call rang. Through the command deck, a Seraphim dreadnought had exited warp space directly in their blind flank. The fleet was being funneled into an ambush. Someone had broadcast their silent coordinates. Vance issued the order, "Retreat, full reverse thrust, now." But Henry was watching, and he didn't move. "No one follows that order," he said coldly. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Henry turned slowly toward Vance. "You leaked our position, just like you did at Red Hollow, just like you did at Vega Prime." Vance's expression didn't change. "You've lost your mind." But then Leah stepped forward, datapad in hand, projecting the decrypted audio logs. It was Vance's voice, unmistakable. "Let Henry burn. They'll see him as the mad captain. I'll rebuild the fleet in my own image." The room turned. Weapons were drawn. A long moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Vance's eyes narrowed. "You're weak, Henry. You cling to honor in a universe that's long since discarded it. I did what had to be done." Henry raised his weapon. "And now I will." A single shot cracked through the bridge. Vance collapsed. A man who believed himself untouchable, undone not by enemies, but by loyalty he thought extinguished. The crew stood still, the silence thick with what had been lost. No cheers, no relief, just the echo of consequences. Henry turned back to the window. "Plot a course to the Vega line. We finish this war on our terms." His voice was iron again, but in his heart another piece of him had died. The ardent vengeance sailed through the Vega corridor in near silence, its systems humming low, as if mourning. Admiral Vance's betrayal had been excised like a tumor, but the wound it left behind bled invisibly through every deck, every crew member's expression. Victory, if it could be called that, had come at the price of something far more vital. And then, steel. Faith. Commander Henry stood alone on the upper deck balcony, looking down at the funeral procession below. Not of Vance, but of those who died because of him. 21 caskets. 21 warriors lost in the false retreat. They passed slowly, shrouded in carbon fiber and starlight. Henry did not speak. He did not blink. He simply stood, a living monument to everything he could not undo. Leah approached later that evening, hands clasped behind her back, expression unreadable. "He always told us he'd die a hero," she said. Henry didn't look at her. He did, in every lie he told himself. They stood there for a while side by side, saying nothing more. In war, silence was often the last truth left standing. Back in the war room, the crew awaited their commander's decision. The Seraphim. Legion hadn't responded yet, but that meant nothing. They would. With Vance gone, Their inside eyes had closed, and now they'd come to blind the rest. "We don't have the numbers," said Captain Reese. "Even with full reinforcement from—" "Call and reach. We're outgunned 3-1, but not outmatched," Henry replied. He tapped the console, revealing a detailed map of Seraphim's command sectors. Weaknesses, fractures, places they'd overextended and left thin. "I don't want to survive anymore," Henry said quietly. "I want to end it." The crew leaned in. Operation Glass Requiem was born. The strategy was bold, insane, some would say. Lure the Seraphim's flagship command vessel into a gravity well near the dying star of Atheon, then detonate a captured fusion core to collapse the sector's fold space gate, isolating their fleet. But it would mean sending a small strike team in first. Henry had already decided. He would lead it. Later, in his quarters, Henry removed his uniform jacket for the first time in days. He ran a trembling hand through his damp hair, staring at the reflection in the viewport. Not of a man, but of a husk wrapped in mission. The lines on his face had deepened. His green eyes, once fire, were now embers. He allowed himself one memory, a child's laughter, long gone from a different time. His son's voice, his wife's hand in his, and then he sealed the memory away, as he always did. Down in the armory, weapons were loaded, armor was fitted. The crew prepared in silence. They knew what Operation Glass Requiem meant. Some of them would not return, but they followed. Henry anyway, not because they were ordered, but because they believed. As the ardent vengeance veered toward the mouth of hell, Henry stood on the bridge. Behind him, a crew scarred by betrayal. Before him, a void waiting to be broken. He whispered, not for anyone else but himself. "They burned our trust. We'll burn their throne." The dying star of Atheon loomed in the void like a wounded god, its surface flickering with violent flares that screamed across space, bathing the battlefield in red and gold. Magnetic storms coiled around it like cosmic serpents, and the gravitational tides warped light itself. To enter its orbit was to dance on the edge of annihilation. Commander Henry stood in the drop bay of the Ardent Vengeance, helmet in hand, gazing into the shimmering projection of the enemy dreadnought, the Veil Ascendant, the Seraphim Legion's crown jewel. A behemoth forged in secrecy and horror, armed with antimatter cannons, cloaking drives, and experimental AI command systems. A ship so feared, most fleet commanders refused to speak its name aloud. And now, Henry planned to destroy it. Operation Glass Requiem had 3 phases. Insertion. Henry's strike team would breach the Veiled Ascendant's lower hull near its power array using reverse pulse drones to bypass shields. Detonation. Plant the captured fusion core inside the dreadnought's main energy spine, destabilizing its antimatter reactor. Collapse. Use the detonation to trigger a fold space implosion, sealing the Vega corridor and the Seraphim fleet inside a dying dimension. It was madness, and it was their only chance. Henry sealed his helmet and entered the drop pod. Leah sat across from him, visor darkened, fingers tapping her rifle nervously. Sergeant Cray, heavy weapons specialist, checked his gear for the 5th time. 4 others joined them, all veterans, all willing to die. As the clamps hissed and the pod disengaged, a deep mechanical voice echoed through the cabin, "Gravitational integrity at 38%. Hull integrity not guaranteed." Henry smirked grimly. "That's good enough." The pod screamed through Atheon's burning corona, the hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Flames licked the windows, the heat sensors whined. Henry's mind was still, one breath at a time, one step at a time. They crashed into the dreadnought's underbelly like a comet, blowing open the breach and rolling into enemy territory amidst fire and debris. Henry was the first to his feet. "Move!" he shouted above the roar of klaxons. The corridors were a nightmare, gleaming black alloy, pulsing crimson lights, strange humming from within the walls. Alien glyphs danced across consoles. This wasn't just a warship, it was a machine of War thinking. The Seraphim came fast. 7-foot brutes in obsidian armor, red lenses glowing like infernos. The firefight was brutal, close quarters. Pulse blasts lit the halls. Cray went down early, chest blown open, his last breath a gurgled laugh. "Keep moving!" Leah screamed, blasting a Seraphim soldier through the throat. "We're running! Out of time!" They reached the core chamber, cathedral-sized, a monolithic column of churning energy suspended in a transparent field. The fusion warhead glowed at Henry's back, synced to his vitals. He stepped forward, attached it to the control housing, and activated the timer. 007 Wadowal. But then the dreadnought spoke, not through speakers, through the ship itself, through their minds. "Henry, you walk among the dead, you speak of hope, but you left yours behind." Images flooded Henry's vision, his son burned into ash, his wife collapsing from radiation poisoning, all the people he failed. Leah screamed beside him, falling to her knees. "Make it stop." "You are not saviors," the voice continued. "You are echoes. We are the future. You are the ruin." The ardent Vengeance hovered in high orbit above Athion's scorched event horizon, its hull pocked and scarred from gravitational shear. The stars around them seemed quieter now, muted, almost mournful. After the detonation of the Veil Ascendant and the collapse of the Vega Fold, the Seraphim fleet was gone, vanished into nothing, but victory, Henry knew, never came without a toll. Inside the medical bay, fluorescent lights buzzed low, casting pale halos over the wounded. The air smelled of antiseptic and seared metal. Leah lay unconscious, her legs stabilized by exosplints and biofoam. Her skin was ghost-pale, bruised, her breathing shallow. Henry stood by her side not as her commander, but as what little remained of her world. She'd followed him into hell. She'd nearly died there, and for what? He watched her chest rise and fall and whispered, "You deserved peace. I brought you fire." The rest of the ship was no better. Of the 12 that had dropped into the dreadnought, only 4 returned. Crew members walked the corridors like specters, victorious, yes, but changed. The kind of silence that followed survival wasn't joy. It was the stunned quiet of those who realized they were still breathing, but didn't know why. In the war room, Captain Reese presented the latest scans. Nothing remained of the Seraphim fleet. Whatever dimension the fold collapse had pulled them into, it had sealed behind them like a tomb. No distress calls, no pings, no anomalies, just absence. And still Henry couldn't rest. He walked the ship for hours, eyes vacant. He visited the crew, thanked the engineers, sat beside the bodies of the fallen, whispering names he had memorized. He forced himself to remember every face, every scream, every silence, because someone had to, because that was what remained. That night, a quiet funeral was held in the main observatory. The walls were turned transparent, giving them the illusion of standing naked beneath the stars. Coffins, 12. Of them were lined in a perfect row. Reese gave a eulogy. It was short, sharp, and bitter. But when Henry stepped forward, the room fell breathless. He said only one sentence. "We didn't fight to win. We fought so that someone else wouldn't have to." And then the airlocks opened. The coffins drifted into space, lit by the light of a dead star. Later, alone, Henry recorded a message for High Command. His voice was dry, unshaven stubble, lining his face, eyes rimmed in red. "Mission success. The Seraphim Legion is gone, but I don't know what we've become. Requesting no ceremony, no commendations. Just let history forget our names. They belong to the dead." He closed the recording as dawn crept over Athion's warped horizon. Leah stirred. She opened her eyes, dazed but alive. Henry was at her bedside. "You made it," she whispered. "So did you," he replied softly. She tried to smile, but it faded. "Did we win?" Henry looked out the window, at the endless black, the stars that still hadn't come back, and said, "We survived." It was day 16 since the destruction of the Veil Ascendant. 16 days without alarms, without hostile pings on long-range scans, without whispered warnings over comms or the ever-present hum of impending dread. For the first time in years, there was only quiet, and to Henry, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, waiting for the wind to push. The ardent Vengeance drifted slowly near the orbit of the shattered moon, Atheon Minor, its jagged remains casting long shadows across the hull. Down in the main hangar, repairs had turned to reassembly, not just of systems or steel, but of people. Wounds were closing, scars were forming, but something vital remained unsaid, lingering in the air like ash after fire. Commander Henry watched as a group of surviving crew members shared a meal in the mess hall. They laughed carefully, as if laughter might be a fragile thing they could break. Across the room, a young pilot named Dren raised a toast to those who never got to see this silence. No one corrected him. Henry didn't join in. He stood at the threshold and listened. That was enough. In the ship's core, Leah had returned to duty earlier than the medics advised. Her leg was stiff, her gait slower, but her eyes were clear, sharper even. She spent hours combing through long-range telemetry, searching for what, exactly? Leftover Seraphim? A sign they weren't really gone? Or maybe she just needed to know the silence hadn't lied. She found something else instead. "Henry," she said over private comms, "you'll want to see this." In the war room, a hollow projection shimmered to life. It was faint, fragmented, an emergency distress call encoded in an obsolete encryption, Earth Military Archive Protocol, EMAP GIA-1V, a code that hadn't been used in over 3 centuries, and yet the signal was pulsing, faint, fractured. 80 Station Vega 12. We opened wrong gate. They came through, not Seraphim, different. Henry stared at the readout. A second incursion, or something worse. Leah's voice was low. "We thought they were the storm. What if they were only the thunder?" Henry didn't answer right away. He moved to the window where the stars seemed to hold their breath. His face, reflected in the glass, was thinner now, older. But his eyes, the fire was back. He tapped the console. "Prep the ship. Activate. Silent scan drones. Set a course for Vega 12. If they're alive, we find them. If they're not," he looked at Leah, "then we find out why." Down in the archive deck, Sergeant Reese, now promoted to XO, stood over Admiral Vance's sealed file. After hesitation, he opened it. Inside were logs the man had never shared. Maps, patterns, psychological evaluations of Henry himself. Vance had known, not just about the Seraphim, but about something else, something older, something he feared more. At the bottom of the file, in Vance's handwriting, the Seraphim were pawns, shadows cast by deeper stars. The silence wasn't safety. It was a pause. As the ardent Vengeance turned from the shattered moon and vanished into faster-than-light travel, a single red spark ignited in the void behind it, a star that hadn't been there moments ago, watching, breathing, waiting, faster than light. Travel is supposed to feel like nothing, like slipping between thoughts, a blink from one corner of the universe to another. But this time, something dragged. Inside the ardent Vengeance, systems glitched, mid-jump, navigation lights flickered, hull sensors reported false impacts, phantom echoes in places with no mass. Even the ship's AI, Kira, began to stutter. Vega 12, not on. Charted plane, gravitational, dissonance. When they re-emerged into real space, the stars around them were wrong. Not absent, just rearranged. The Vega 12 relay station was supposed to orbit a blue-white giant, nestled in a field of smaller comm satellites and trade hubs. Instead, the system looked shattered. The stars still burned, but dim, pale, like it was dying ahead of schedule. Every nearby satellite had been twisted apart, orbiting in warped ellipses as if bent by a child's hand. The station itself was there, but only barely, broken in half. Spinning slowly, hull torn open like something crawled out, and the distress signal still pulsed, fragmented, repeating. Henry stood on the bridge with Leah, Reese, and the last of his elite crew. "This isn't a battlefield," Reese whispered. "It's a warning." Henry gave no orders for a long moment. Then, "Gear up. We go in." The boarding party approached in silence. The docking umbilical connected with a hollow clang. They moved through the corridors of Vega 12 like ghosts. The station was cold, airless. Flashlights cut through floating debris, tools, shattered glass, and things harder to identify. No bodies, no blood, but something worse. Every wall was covered in symbols, etched, burned, or written in a charcoal-like smear. They pulsed faintly when passed. Not seraphim. Not human. Older. They reached the control core and found the logs. A single entry, preserved by a black box emergency AI, a young technician's voice, shaking. "It wasn't them. It wasn't the seraphim. We opened the gate. And something looked back. They didn't board us. They rewrote us." Commander Velasquez started speaking in reverse. Then his voice kept talking, even after he died. "Don't answer the signal. Don't—" The log ended with static. And then something else. Not words, not language. Just a low tone that made Henry's ears ring and his vision blur. Kira cut the feed. Silence. But Kira didn't respond. Instead, a soft voice, his own, echoed through the comm. "Commander? Henry? You are the key. We remember you. We will write through you next." The lights failed, and everything shifted. Suddenly the walls weren't steel. They were stars. The floor became an ocean of data, rippling beneath their boots. And Henry stood not on a station, but inside some kind of thought. A simulation? A prison? A door? Across from him, a shape formed. A humanoid silhouette, faceless, tall, cloaked in moving starlight. The air bent around it like space obeyed it out of fear. It didn't speak with sound, but Henry heard it. The seraphim were seekers. We were what they found. And now we find you. Henry felt something pulling at his thoughts. Memories rearranged, emotions flayed open. Every choice he'd made laid bare. The betrayals, the fire, the silence. "You've always sought peace," the voice said. "Then let us make you hollow." He screamed as the station fractured around them. Suddenly, a flare of light. Leah, outside the breach, activated a resonance grenade. The real world snapped back. Henry collapsed, blood dripping from his nose. Reese pulled him out. Behind them, the station cracked in half, not from explosives, but as if space refused to hold it anymore.